Picture a lavish palace courtyard where a golden-collared hound lounges on cushions embroidered with thread of gold, fed delicacies by servants who bow as they pass. Now step through a single locked door down a narrow staircase, and there, in the damp darkness, a shackled nobleman shivers on straw, his crime nothing more than speaking truth to power. These two lives, separated by mere stones in a palace wall, tell a story far stranger than fiction, because in the ancient courts of kings and emperors, royal pets and political prisoners weren't just accidents of fate, they were carefully crafted symbols, two sides of the same brutal coin. A pampered lion could be draped in jewels one day and fed a disgraced general the next. A poet might write verses for the queen's parrot in the morning and find himself writing them from a dungeon by nightfall. This is the untold dance of favor and fear, where every purring cat and every silenced dissenter served the same purpose, to remind the world who held the leash. What if I told you the most powerful rulers in history used animals and humans as pawns in the same psychological game? That the same hand that scratched behind a favorite monkey's ears could sign a death warrant without blinking. From the elephant ambassadors of India's Maharajas to the caged scholars of Byzantium, these parallel lives reveal a chilling truth. In the eyes of absolute power, loyalty and rebellion were performances staged on the same bloody theater. A dog's collar could be as political as a prisoner's chains. Both were meant to be seen, to send a message. The pet flaunted the ruler's generosity, the prisoner their ruthlessness. But dig deeper and you'll find something even more unsettling. Sometimes the pet and the prisoner traded places. A fall from grace could turn a treasured falconer into the kingdom's most notorious traitor overnight, or elevate a captured enemy's prized stallion to royal status as a trophy. So why does this eerie mirroring matter today? Because these stories aren't just about the past. They're about how power still plays with lives, how symbols can soften or sharpen a ruler's image. When a medieval emperor gifted a rare white peacock to a rival, was it so different from modern leaders posing with rescue dogs for the cameras? And when a pharaoh's favorite baboon was buried in a sarcophagus fit for a prince while his vizier rotted in an unmarked pit, what does that say about who we value then and now? This video isn't just a tour through history's strangest shadows. It's a key to understanding the oldest trick in the book, how to make oppression look like mercy, and how the same system that spoils one creature can break another without a second thought. The real question isn't whether these pets and prisoners were alike. It's whether we've ever stopped seeing the world the way those ancient rulers did. In ancient Egypt, cats weren't just pets, they were gods in fur. Pharaohs adorned them with golden amulets, fed them milk from jeweled bowls, and mourned their deaths with the same elaborate rituals reserved for royalty. But this worship wasn't just about affection. When a Persian ambassador once accidentally killed a sacred Egyptian cat, the pharaoh's wrath was swift and merciless. Why? Because that cat was a walking symbol of divine authority, a fluffy reminder that the ruler's power extended even to the animals under his protection. Move east to the courts of China's Tang dynasty, and you'd find peacocks strutting through marble halls with tiny silver bells on their legs, their feathers woven into the emperor's robes. These weren't decorations, they were propaganda. A peacock's iridescence mirrored the emperor's supposed celestial connection, while the lion kept by Assyria's Ashurbanipal wasn't just a pet but a living, breathing threat. Chained beside the throne, its roar silenced dissent before a single word could be spoken. Yet behind the gilded cages and gem-studded leashes lay a darker truth. The same ruler who commissioned a solid gold sarcophagus for his favorite greyhound might execute a servant for accidentally stepping on its shadow. In Persia, royal dogs wore collars inscribed with curses against anyone who harmed them, while in Rome, Emperor Caligula famously planned to make his horse a consul, a grotesque joke that underscored how easily the line between honor and humiliation could be erased. These animals were never just companions, they were chess pieces moved to distract, intimidate, or dazzle. When China's Empress Wu Zetian received a rare white elephant from a tributary state, the message was clear. Her dominion stretched so far, even nature's wonders bowed to her. But the most telling detail, how quickly these sacred creatures could be discarded. When the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar's prized lion died during a siege, its body was tossed over the walls like common refuse, proof that no amount of jewels could mask the fragility of favor. This is the paradox of royal pets. Their luxury was always a performance, a shimmering veil over the raw machinery of power. And just beyond the palace gardens, in the dungeons below, another kind of symbol languished in chains, one that rulers needed just as much as their beloved beasts. Because if pets were the glittering proof of a monarch's grace, prisoners were the stark reminder of what happened when that grace ran out. While royal pets basked in luxury, another group lived in the shadow of palace walls, those who dared to cross the throne. Political prisoners weren't just locked away, they were meticulously broken, their suffering designed to send a message louder than any proclamation. Take the Romanovs' rivals left to rot in the Kremlin's bell towers, where the deafening chimes drove them to madness, or the scholars of Han China, whose tongues were cut out for writing poems that questioned the emperor's divinity. Their grim fate was no accident, it was theater. A nobleman forced to wear a donkey's head in court, a general paraded in chains through the streets. These weren't just punishments. They were lessons etched in flesh, proving that no one was beyond the ruler's reach. Yet the cruelest irony, many of these prisoners once stood where the royal pets did, beloved, favored, draped in honor. Until the day they weren't. The Byzantine general Belisarius, who conquered nations for Emperor Justinian, spent his final years blinded and begging outside the palace gates. In Mughal India, a vizier who'd once fed almonds to the emperor's parrots might find himself picking rice from the dirt under armed guard. The line between favorite and fugitive was razor thin, and crossing it required nothing more than a whispered rumor or a rival's envy. But here's where the story twists. Some prisoners weren't just warnings, they were tools. The Ottoman sultans kept deposed princes in gilded cages within Topkapi Palace, alive but never free, a macabre insurance policy against rebellion. In Versailles, Louis XIV's masked prisoner, the man in the iron mask, wasn't merely hidden. His very anonymity became a spectacle, a rumor that kept the court in terrified suspense. These rulers understood something chilling. A broken man could be more useful than a dead one. His existence, his silence, even his screams all served the throne. So when we ask if prisoners were the dark mirror to royal pets, the answer is more unsettling than a simple yes. They were two sides of the same performance. A lion in a jeweled collar and a dissenter in a dungeon both played their parts in the ruler's drama, one to dazzle, the other to terrify. But sometimes their roles blurred. The Mongol Khans famously adopted sons of conquered kings, raising them alongside their own heirs only to turn them into hostages if their homelands rebelled. Even in despair, prisoners held power. Their very suffering was currency, proof that the throne could break anything or anyone it chose, and that perhaps is the most haunting parallel of all. Because in the end, whether pampered or punished, both pets and prisoners were just reflections of the same unyielding truth. In the halls of absolute power, loyalty was fleeting, and survival was the only game that mattered. Imagine the sound of peacock cries mingling with the groans of chained men. This was the daily reality in the Mughal emperor's Red Fort, where the same courtyard hosted both jeweled birds and prisoners awaiting execution. The Byzantines took this cruel irony further, building Emperor Theophilo's private menagerie directly above the dungeons, so the roars of lions and laughter of courtiers would echo through the cells below. It wasn't just about space, it was psychological warfare. A starving rebel could hear the clink of gold bowls as imperial leopards were fed roasted meat, a constant reminder that even beasts ranked higher than the disgraced. One of the most chilling examples comes from medieval Europe, where King John of England famously fed captured Welsh rebels to his prized hunting pack. The symbolism was grotesquely precise, loyal hounds devouring traitors, a spectacle meant to show that defiance turned men into mere meat, but the deeper message. That both creatures, the snarling dogs and the broken prisoners, were equally instruments of the crown. Even in death, they served the king's narrative. This overlap wasn't always violent. Sometimes it wore a mask of mercy. The Ottoman sultans would occasionally pardon condemned men to serve as caretakers for their elephant collections, a twisted kindness that exchanged one cage for another. And in Renaissance Florence, the Medicis kept exotic parrots near their prison towers, the bird's mimicry ensuring that every whispered plea or confession might be repeated as entertainment at the next banquet. These rulers understood the power of juxtaposition, the vibrant plumage of a macaw against the grey pallor of a shackled dissenter made both symbols more potent. What's most unsettling is how these collisions reveal the fluidity of power. A Persian vizier's diary describes watching the Shah's favorite falcon perch on the throne one morning, while that afternoon the same seat held a rebel chieftain in chains. The lesson: today's treasured creature could be tomorrow's prey, and today's prisoner might, if fortune smiled, be tomorrow's pet. This wasn't just cruelty, it was a masterclass in control. By blurring the lines between privilege and punishment, rulers kept everyone, beast and man, guessing where they stood. The parrot might sing for supper today, but the hand that fed it could just as easily wring its neck tomorrow. And that uncertainty, that constant dance between favor and fear, was the real cage. Consider the pharaoh's sacred crocodiles, draped in gold and worshipped like deities, their every movement interpreted as divine will. Now contrast them with the rebels dragged through Rome in triumphs, their broken bodies displayed like trophies beneath garlands and cheering crowds. These weren't random acts of cruelty or affection. They were calculated propaganda, a masterclass in symbolism. A monarch's hand feeding grapes to a pet monkey wasn't just kindness, it was theater, a carefully staged scene to humanize a ruler who might, hours later, order a family executed without hesitation. Every purring cat in an Egyptian temple, every chained bear in a medieval castle courtyard served the same purpose: to soften the edges of absolute power, to make tyranny seem benevolent. But the spectacle didn't stop at life. In death, the duality grew even starker. While royal pets were mummified with more care than common citizens, think of the cat cemeteries of Bubastis, where thousands of felines were laid to rest in linen shrouds. Political prisoners were left to rot in public view. The Mongols famously piled skulls into pyramids outside conquered cities, while Tudor England displayed traitors' heads on spikes along London Bridge. The message: even in decay, the ruler's narrative prevailed. A mummified falcon whispered of divine favor. A decomposing rebel screamed consequences. Yet the most ingenious manipulation lay in the overlap. The Aztec Emperor Moctezuma kept exotic birds in golden cages just steps from the skull racks of sacrificed enemies. Visitors would marvel at the vibrant feathers, then shudder at the hollow-eyed warnings nearby. This juxtaposition wasn't accidental, it was psychological alchemy. By pairing beauty with brutality, rulers could appear both cultured and invincible. A Persian Shah's beloved cheetah, trained to hunt gazelles at royal banquets, mirrored the fate of dissidents, hunted, broken, and ultimately disposable. What makes this propaganda so effective isn't just its cruelty, but its adaptability. When Queen Elizabeth I posed with her lapdogs in official portraits, their smallness emphasized her maternal warmth. Yet when her spies uncovered plots against her, the same delicate hand signed warrants for torture. The pets and prisoners weren't opposites, they were collaborators in a single narrative. One showcased mercy, the other justice. Together, they created the illusion of balance. This theatrical duality reveals a deeper truth: power thrives on emotional whiplash. The same crowd that wept when a Byzantine emperor buried his favorite warhorse with full honors would cheer as he blinded a rival in the hippodrome. The emotional whiplash kept subjects off balance, forever guessing whether they'd be the next to receive a jeweled collar or iron shackles. And that uncertainty, that was the real leash. To understand why rulers lavished silken pillows on pets while stretching humans on racks, we must step inside the gilded cage of absolute power, a place where love and terror were two sides of the same coin. Historians whisper of kings who whispered secrets into their dogs' ears, not because they trusted the animals more than their advisors, but because a hound could never betray them. These pets became emotional lifelines in courts thick with poison and daggers, living symbols of the unconditional loyalty no human could provide. The Byzantine Princess Anna Komnene wrote of her father's falcon, the only creature he allowed to perch on his throne. "It knows nothing of treason," he reportedly said, stroking its feathers while plotting the blinding of his own brother. Yet this affection was never innocent. When Caligula hosted banquets for his horse Incitatus complete with marble stables and ivory feed buckets, he wasn't just mocking his senators. He was demonstrating that even the lowest creature could be elevated above them with a snap of his fingers. The message: no one's position was secure. Modern psychologists call this arbitrary reinforcement, the deliberate unpredictability that keeps subjects perpetually off balance. One day, a courtier might be hand-feeding the emperor's favorite parrot. The next, that same hand could sign his death warrant. The Mughal Emperor Jahangir kept detailed diaries mourning his dead hunting dogs while casually recording the executions of hundreds. To him, there was no contradiction. The dogs had never lied to him, but the most chilling insight comes from the accounts of royal physicians. The French King Charles VI, who believed he was made of glass, would clutch his lapdogs during fits of madness, convinced their warmth kept him from shattering. His doctors noted that the moment the dogs wandered off, his paranoia would fixate on human attendants, leading to purges of the household. This wasn't just madness, it was power's ultimate isolation. The more untouchable a ruler became, the more they craved the simplicity of a creature that couldn't scheme. The pet offered the illusion of control, while the prisoner became the outlet for every suppressed fury. Archaeologists have found evidence of this duality in the unlikeliest places. Beneath Windsor Castle, Henry VIII's kennel records show meticulous care for his greyhounds' diets, specific cuts of meat, herbal remedies, even woolen blankets for arthritic joints. Yet in the same cellar, shackle marks on the walls tell a different story. The same man who fretted over a dog's sore paw would later watch as Anne Boleyn's terrier, Percoy, plunged to its death from a palace window, some say by his order, just days before the Queen's own execution. The parallel is stomach-churning. As the king's love for his wife curdled, so too did his tolerance for her pet. Perhaps the most revealing case comes from the letters of a Medici courtier describing Cosimo de Medici's macaw. The bird could recite psalms in Latin, earning it a place at formal dinners until the day it squawked a nobleman's whispered joke about Cosimo's limp. The bird was immediately gifted to a rival family, while the nobleman vanished into the palazzo's infamous little windows. The macaw, like the prisoner, had served its purpose, proof that nothing escaped the ruler's notice. Whether feather or flesh, all existed to magnify his power. In the end, the line between pet and prisoner wasn't just thin, it was imaginary. Both were mirrors held up to absolute authority, reflecting whatever version of itself the throne needed to see. In the sweltering heat of ancient Pataliputra, Emperor Ashoka's favorite elephant stood draped in chains of gold, its forehead painted with vermilion paste, a living emblem of imperial majesty. Court poets wrote of how the beast wept when Ashoka died, its mournful trumpets echoing through the palace corridors. Yet just beyond the city's lotus-filled ponds lay the infamous Ashoka prison pits, where rebels choked on darkness, their limbs twisted in devices designed to prolong agony. This stark duality wasn't accidental. The elephant's gilded chains and the prisoner's iron ones served the same master, a ruler who understood that power thrives on contrast. The elephant named Dhananjaya wasn't just a pet, it was a propaganda machine. Ashoka rode it into conquered cities, its towering bulk a silent reminder of his unstoppable might. When it knelt so he could dismount, the gesture symbolized not just obedience but divine sanction. Buddhist texts describe how the animal would bow to stupas, reinforcing Ashoka's image as a righteous king. But in the prison pits, the messaging flipped. The emperor's edicts boast of his mercy, yet his jailers perfected horrors like the peacock's dance, where victims were suspended over slow fires, their contortions mimicking the bird's grace. Why such extremes? Because Ashoka's reign hinged on a delicate balance. The elephant's loyalty proved his virtue, while the pits proved his resolve. What's most revealing is how these symbols could swap roles. After his brutal conquest of Kalinga, Ashoka famously converted to Buddhism, releasing prisoners and erecting hospitals for animals. Yet even his repentance was strategic. The freed elephants given to temples became walking advertisements for his enlightenment, while former rebels were pardoned into roles as palace guards, their visible presence a warning against future dissent. The line between mercy and manipulation blurred. A prisoner might leave the pits alive, but his scars ensured he'd never stop serving the emperor's narrative. Archaeologists have found remnants of Dhananjaya's golden howdah near Patna, its intricate carvings depicting Ashoka feeding the elephant by hand. Less than a mile away, excavations uncovered rusted manacles engraved with the emperor's lion emblem, the same symbol that adorned his pillars of peace. This juxtaposition captures the paradox at the heart of power. The same hand that tenderly offered sugarcane to a pachyderm could condemn thousands to torment without a second thought. And perhaps that's the most unsettling lesson. Whether through an elephant's tears or a traitor's screams, Ashoka proved that absolute rule doesn't distinguish between love and fear. It weaponizes both. In the gilded halls of the Han dynasty, the emperor's songbirds trilled melodies so sweet, courtiers swore the very walls hummed in response. These weren't mere pets, they were living metaphors, their synchronized chirping a carefully curated symphony of imperial harmony. Each feathered performer, from the golden oriole to the crested myna, had its place in the hierarchy of cages, just as every scholar, general, and servant had theirs in the court below. But beneath this veneer of perfection lurked a darker chorus, the stifled voices of thinkers who dared question Emperor Wu's vision. While birds sang freely in jeweled enclosures, philosophers who spoke too boldly found their lips sealed not with silk, but with exile, imprisonment, or worse. The cruelty lay in the contrast. Imperial aviaries were masterpieces of artifice, designed to mimic wild groves where birds could choose to stay. Gold-leafed branches held bowls of sugared water, jade perches angled just so to catch the morning sun. Yet the scholar's fate revealed the illusion. When historian Sima Qian defended a disgraced general, his punishment was deliberate and symbolic: castration, a mutilation meant to silence not just his voice but his legacy. The message was clear: true harmony required some songs to be cut short. Even the birds played their part in this charade. Court records describe how keepers plucked feathers from those that sang off-key, replacing them with more compliant specimens. The aviary's perfection wasn't natural, it was enforced. What makes this duality so chilling is how seamlessly it served Wu's propaganda. Visitors marveling at the birds' joyful captivity would pass corridors where banned texts smoldered in braziers. A poet praising the emperor's compassion toward creatures might later compose verses under watchful guards, his brush trembling. The birds, after all, could be replaced, their songs were interchangeable. But as scholars' ideas, those were dangerous. When Wu's armies expanded China's borders, they brought back exotic birds to fill new wings of the aviary, just as they brought conquered scribes to kneel in the throne room. Both were trophies, one decorative, the other cautionary. Yet the most revealing detail lies in the silence between the notes. Archaeologists excavating Han palaces found bird bones buried in lacquered boxes alongside tiny bronze bells, collars that once ensured no bird could fly unnoticed. In the same layers, they uncovered writing slates rubbed smooth, their inscriptions erased by anxious hands. The parallel is unmistakable. Control over creatures and minds followed the same blueprint. A bird's bell and a scholar's gag served identical purposes: to remind all beneath the emperor's gaze that every song, every word belonged to him. This hypocrisy reached its peak in Wu's famed Spring Hunt, where scholars were invited to compose verses about freed birds soaring over the capital. The winning poem's line, "Even the sparrow knows its place in heaven's order," was engraved on plaques throughout the aviary. Few noted the irony. The birds released that day had their wings clipped beforehand, dooming them to die beyond the palace walls. Just like the exiled scholars who gained their freedom, their fate was never truly their own. The emperor's genius lay in making oppression feel like mercy, in crafting a world where cages looked like gardens and silence sounded like peace. And in that world, the most valuable creatures weren't those who sang, but those who made others believe the song was theirs to begin with. The Hall of Mirrors at Versailles glittered with 1,000 reflections, each one bending to capture the same impossible image: a tiny spaniel in a sapphire-encrusted collar, perched like a living jewel on Louis XIV's lap. These dogs, Mignon, Madame, and the rest weren't just pets. They were masterstrokes of propaganda, their silken ribbons and pearl-studded leashes proof that even a king's affection could be weaponized. Visitors would sigh at the sight of Louis' hand feeding them sugared violets, their tails brushing his ermine robes. But just 3 corridors away, down a staircase no courtier dared mention, another figure occupied the monarch's imagination: the man in the iron mask. No ribbons adorned his restraints, no portraits captured his face. While Versailles' lapdogs were immortalized in tapestries and memoirs, this prisoner's very identity was erased, his existence reduced to the clink of a lock and the shuffle of guards' boots. The contrast couldn't have been more deliberate. The spaniel symbolized Louis' benevolence, proof that beneath the crown beat a heart tender enough to dote on creatures smaller than his scepter. Their names were recorded with care, their diets debated by physicians, their deaths mourned with court-wide processions. Meanwhile, the masked man was a void, a living riddle whose purpose wasn't to be seen but to be imagined. Every whispered theory about him disgraced noble, twin brother only amplified the king's mystique. Louis understood something modern leaders still grasp: power thrives on duality. The lapdog humanizes, the faceless prisoner terrifies. Together, they create a ruler who can be both adored and feared in the same breath. But here's the twist: both were prisoners of Versailles' grand illusion. The dogs, for all their privilege, were as trapped as the man in the mask. Their collars chained them to performative love, their every wag choreographed to soften the king's image. When Mignon once nipped a duchess, she was banished from court, proof that even favored creatures were disposable. As for the masked prisoner, his anonymity became its own kind of spectacle. Guards rotated shifts to ensure no one heard his voice, yet the very secrecy surrounding him made him impossible to ignore. In a palace where visibility meant survival, his invisibility was the ultimate power play. Why does this duality still haunt us? Because it strips bare the mechanics of control. The spaniels' names endure in history books not despite their frivolity, but because of it. They remind us how easily charm can distract from cruelty. The mask's persistence in popular culture, though, speaks to something darker: our collective itch to unmask the silenced, to give voice to the erased. Louis knew that by denying his prisoner even a name, he turned him into a mirror. Every generation that obsesses over the mask's secret is really asking, who would we be in that darkness? Would we be the spaniel, basking in gilded comfort, or the faceless one, paying the price for someone else's narrative? Versailles' greatest trick wasn't its gold or its mirrors. It was making us believe these two fates were opposites. In truth, they were collaborators in the same lie. The lapdog's luxury and the prisoner's oblivion were threads woven into the same tapestry, one that hangs in history's gallery with a warning stitched into its edges: beware the ruler who offers a velvet leash alongside an iron mask. Both, in the end, are tools to keep you exactly where he wants you. Walk through the Topkapi Palace's archives, and you'll find something astonishing. A 16th century Persian miniature where the Sultan's favorite greyhound, its collar studded with emeralds, sits regally beside a chained rebel, both framed by the same gilded border. This wasn't just art, it was a manifesto in pigment. Across continents and centuries, royal courts encoded their power dynamics into culture, weaving pets and prisoners into tapestries, poems, and even legal codes. The Mughals commissioned epic poems comparing their falcon's loyalty to the shame of traitors' eyes. Tudor playwrights staged allegories where lapdogs licked the king's hand, while bears mauled allegorical figures of dissent. Every brushstroke and quill flourish reinforced the same lesson: favor and punishment were two sides of the same coin, and culture was the mint that stamped it. But the cultural manipulation ran deeper than propaganda. In Safavid Persia, the law literally equated harming a royal hunting dog with treason, both crimes punishable by impalement. Meanwhile, Ottoman scribes penned illuminated manuscripts where the Sultan's parrot, trained to recite Quranic verses, shared pages with sketches of prisoners forced to build the very libraries that celebrated their captors. The message was insidious. Even knowledge itself was curated by the throne. This wasn't just about intimidating enemies, it was about reshaping reality. When the Chinese Emperor Qianlong's Italian painter, Giuseppe Castiglione, depicted the ruler's beloved mastiffs as celestial guardians, their fur rendered in delicate ink washes, he wasn't just flattering his patron. He was visually erasing the fact that those same dogs had been gifts from conquered Mongol chiefs, living spoils of war reframed as tributes to imperial virtue. The personal toll on those caught in this cultural machinery was devastating. Take the Florentine artist Cellini, who sculpted a diamond-encrusted collar for Duke Cosimo's prized badger, only to later mold his own shackles during imprisonment in the same palace. Or the unnamed Korean court painters forced to illustrate the Joseon king's phoenixes while their colleagues languished in tiger cages for sketching his likeness without permission. Even the act of creation became a tightrope walk between celebration and subversion. The Mughal poet Ghalib, who penned verses comparing Emperor Bahadur Shah's songbird to an angel's sigh, later wrote in secret of how its cage reminded him of his own silenced friends. Perhaps the most haunting legacy lies in how these cultural artifacts warped time itself. Marie Antoinette's poodle, Thisbe, was immortalized in porcelain figurines that sold as patriotic souvenirs, while the Queen's jailers burned prisoners' letters to prevent any trace of their humanity from surviving. The poodle's likeness endured, the prisoners' voices turned to ash. This selective memory wasn't accidental. It was the ultimate act of control, ensuring future generations would marvel at the golden collars but never ask who paid for them in blood. Yet cracks in the facade occasionally appeared. Archaeologists recently discovered a palimpsest beneath a Vatican fresco of Pope Leo X's elephant, Hanno. Scratched into the plaster by some daring hand were the words, "He feeds it sweets, he feeds us lies." That anonymous whisper, buried under layers of paint, reminds us that for all the tapestries and sonnets glorifying royal mercy, someone always knew the truth. The real cultural legacy of these pets and prisoners isn't just the art they inspired, it's the warning they left behind. When power dictates the story, even beauty becomes a weapon. In the shadow of every pampered royal beast and every forgotten prisoner stood a keeper, the invisible hands that fed, disciplined, and maintained the delicate balance of fear and favor. These men and women lived in a liminal world, neither fully part of the court's glitter nor entirely free of its darkness. Take the Egyptian priests of the sacred cats, whose duty to anoint felines with perfumed oils and chant hymns at their funerals earned them palace-side quarters and exemption from taxes. Contrast them with the Roman carnifices, jailers who faced public loathing for executing sentences, yet whose hands held the keys to the empire's most feared interrogation chambers. Both roles demanded unwavering loyalty, but where one brought proximity to divinity, the other carried the stench of death. The privileges of pet keepers could border on surreal. Mughal falconers wore robes embroidered with their birds' names in pearls, and Byzantine bear trainers dined on leftovers from the emperor's table, but the true measure of their status lay in what they witnessed. A Han Dynasty birdkeeper's diary describes the moment Emperor Wu's favorite magpie alerted him to an assassination attempt. The keeper was rewarded with land, while the would-be assassin's family became the jailer's next charges. This cruel irony repeated across cultures. Those who tended royal pets often held front-row seats to the consequences of disloyalty, their own safety hinging on creatures that couldn't speak. Jailers, though, inhabited a far grimmer reality. Roman records describe how ergastular guards were required to wear the same coarse wool as their prisoners, a symbolic taint marking their social pollution. Yet without them, the empire's spectacle of justice crumbled. When Emperor Tiberius' chief jailer, Lucius Sejanus, fell from grace, the Senate didn't just execute him, they threw him to the very prison mobs he'd once controlled. The message was clear: those who handled society's filth could never truly be clean, but the most haunting accounts come from those who crossed between worlds. A Persian manuscript tells of a Shah's elephant trainer reassigned to oversee political prisoners after his charge died. His diary recounts feeding apricots to the beast one month, then watching former viziers lick gruel from the same trough the next. The stables smelled sweeter, he wrote, though both cages had bars. This duality forced keepers into moral contortions. Egyptian cat priests underwent ritual purification to handle sacred animals, yet the same hands that bandaged a lion cub's paw might later prepare the mummy of a prisoner sacrificed to accompany it into the afterlife. What does this say about the nature of complicity? The Aztec Quetzal bird keepers who plucked emerald feathers for royal headdresses were exempt from human sacrifice, but their survival depended on supplying beauty to mask brutality. Similarly, Tudor dog handlers enjoyed warm lodgings near the kennels, just yards from the tower's torture chambers. Their proximity to power wasn't a reward, it was a leash. Because the moment a keeper hesitated, like the Ottoman falconer who smuggled messages to a caged prince, they discovered how quickly roles could reverse. The Sultan had him blinded with hot irons, then reassigned to tend the royal mews, where his stumbling movements became a daily lesson in the cost of mercy. Perhaps the most poignant evidence lies in what these keepers left behind. Excavations at Versailles reveal dog collars engraved not with the names of spaniels, but of their groomers, Pierre, keeper of Mimi, 1782. Meanwhile, beneath Rome's Mamertine prison, archaeologists found jailers' tallies scratched into walls, counting days until their own terms ended. These mundane traces scream the untold truth. Whether tending a parrot or a prisoner, every keeper was ultimately measuring time until their own usefulness ran out. And that's the cruelest parallel of all. In the eyes of power, the hands that held the leash and the hands that turned the key were equally disposable. The death of Sultan Mehmed III's prized hunting falcon sent the Ottoman court into weeks of mourning. Black banners draped the palace. Elegies were composed by the empire's greatest poets, and the bird's coffin was carried through Istanbul on a velvet litter. That same year, the Sultan ordered the strangulation of his 19 younger brothers, including boys as young as 12, their bodies stacked in the Topkapi courtyard like firewood. This grotesque contradiction wasn't an aberration, it was the rule. From Nero sobbing over his parrot's demise while poisoning political rivals at banquets, to Queen Isabella of Castile commissioning jeweled shrines for her greyhounds while the Inquisition burned heretics alive, history's most powerful figures perfected a chilling duality: boundless compassion for creatures, bottomless cruelty for humans. Philosophers saw through the charade. Seneca mocked emperors who wore mourning veils for deceased lapdogs while exiling senators without trial, asking, what god taught them to grieve beasts yet slaughter men like cattle? The answer lies in the raw psychology of power. A pet's love is simple, unconditional. It doesn't plot or question, but human loyalty, always suspect. The Mughal Emperor Jahangir's memoirs confess this unflinchingly. My hounds greet me with wagging tails whether I return from hunt or massacre, my nobles. Their smiles shift with the wind. This wasn't just paranoia, it was strategy. By lavishing affection on animals, rulers crafted an illusion of tenderness to offset their brutality. When Tsar Ivan the Terrible's favorite stallion died, he buried it in Moscow's cathedral cemetery, a deliberate provocation to the families of boyars he'd had skinned alive. The message, even a horse deserved more dignity than disloyal men. Modern parallels reveal how little the script has changed. A 21st century dictator's Instagram feed might feature him bottle-feeding orphan tiger cubs while his prisons overflow with dissenting journalists. Corporate CEOs pose with rescue dogs in annual reports as their factories exploit child labor. The dissonance isn't accidental, it's calculated. Psychologists call it moral licensing, the belief that small acts of kindness excuse larger crimes. A medieval king donating silver collars to a monastery's stray cats could justify burning a village with its inhabitants locked inside. The pets weren't just companions, they were alibis. Yet rebellion often began with those who refused the charade. When the samurai Asano Naganori saw the shogun's concubine cradling a sick puppy while prisoners starved in Edo's pits, His infamous act of defiance wasn't just about honor, it was a rejection of the entire hypocrisy. Similarly, the French Revolution's pamphlets didn't just attack Marie Antoinette's spending, they mocked her poodles wearing ribbons in the colors of regiments sent to crush bread riots. The animals became shorthand for a regime's moral bankruptcy. Perhaps the most revealing moment comes from an excavated Babylonian tablet. It records King Nebuchadnezzar weeping as his lioness died giving birth, ordering 40 days of fasting. The very next entry, a casual note to execute 3 musicians for playing a minor key during his nap. 2,000 years later, we still grapple with that same disconnect, how societies can rally to save stranded whales while turning away refugee boats. The royal pets and prisoners of history hold up a mirror, forcing us to ask whose suffering moves us and whose do we rationalize away. The answer might just reveal whose leash we're wearing. Even in the tightest chains, the human spirit finds ways to twist the leash back on the hand that holds it. History whispers of prisoners who turned their captors' own symbols against them, like the Mongol warrior captured by Genghis Khan, forced to train the imperial hawks. Day after day, he fed the birds from his shackled hands, whispering secrets into their feathers. Then, on the eve of a great hunt, the Khan's prized raptors began dropping from the sky, their talons curled in agony. The trainer had slipped belladonna into their meat, sacrificing the creatures to deny his enemy the thrill of the chase. His execution was slow, but the message lingered. Even a broken man could make empires' pets into weapons. More ingenious still was the escape of a Byzantine scholar jailed for mocking Emperor Justinian's taxes. Locked in a cell beneath the aviary, he spent months listening to the emperor's parrot screech Greek phrases, "Glory to the crown," and "Bring me wine," until he could mimic them perfectly. One night, he echoed the bird's cries to convince guards the parrot had flown into the dungeon. When they opened the door, he greeted them with the emperor's favorite obscenity in the parrot's voice, then slipped past their confusion into the streets. The bird, unknowingly complicit, kept its golden perch. The scholar vanished into the dockside slums, his laughter blending with the gulls. These weren't just acts of desperation, they were masterclasses in psychological warfare. In Ming China, a concubine imprisoned for witchcraft taught the emperor's minor birds to recite her prophecies. Their eerie songs about the fall of the red walls spread panic through the court until the birds were silenced, but not before the damage was done. The emperor ordered the palace repainted, and the concubine, though never freed, died smiling. Even animals could become unwitting rebels when human voices were gagged. The most chilling defiance, though, came from those who weaponized their captors' sentimentality. When Louis XVI's jailers allowed him to keep his spaniel, Clary, in the temple prison, they never guessed the dog's collar would carry coded notes to royalists. Or that the Queen's last act before the guillotine would be stitching a map of escape routes into the lining of her terrier's coat. The dog survived the revolution, adopted by a Republican family, its fur still hiding the threads of a dead woman's hope. What makes these stories so electrifying isn't just their audacity, but their revelation of power's blind spot. Rulers who saw animals as tools never imagined they could become Trojan horses. A parrot's mimicry, a hawk's hunger, even a lapdog's loyalty, each could be turned against the throne when the oppressed got creative. And perhaps that's the ultimate rebellion, proving that no symbol is ever truly under control. The moment a ruler believes his pets reflect only his glory, he's already lost the narrative, because in the right hands or the right beak, even a golden cage can become a key. A Roman senator, thrown into the Tullianum dungeon for defying Emperor Nero, awoke to the scrape of paws against stone. His blind hunting hound, left to starve outside the prison, had tracked his scent through sewer tunnels and spent 3 nights digging beneath the walls, or so the legend goes. When guards found the pair curled together in the filth, even their hardened hearts faltered. The senator was exiled instead of executed, his dog trotting proudly beside him into banishment. Centuries later in Delhi, a Mughal emperor's parrot reportedly squawked, "Release him," during a nobleman's sentencing, mimicking the ruler's habitual pardon phrase with such perfect timing that the court erupted in laughter, and the prisoner walked free. These stories, passed down like smuggled notes through history, share more than whimsy. They reveal a profound truth. In systems designed to dehumanize, animals became unexpected conduits for mercy. The Byzantine chronicler Procopius wrote of a lynx that slipped into a Constantinople prison to bring scraps to a jailed general, its nightly visits shaming the jailers into improving rations. Whether fact or folklore, such tales gave the oppressed something rare, a narrative where compassion outmaneuvered cruelty, even if only through tooth and claw. But flip the coin and the picture darkens. When the French Revolution toppled Versailles, the mob didn't just guillotine aristocrats, they slaughtered their pets en masse. Marie Antoinette's spaniels were tossed from palace windows. The Duc d'Orléans' exotic birds were cooked in their gilded cages. These weren't random acts of violence. They were deliberate strikes at the monarchy's most potent symbols. Just as royal pets once humanized tyrants, their deaths now dehumanized the fallen. The cruelest twist came when pets themselves became prisoners. After the Pugachev rebellion, Catherine the Great ordered the rebels' favorite bear cub chained in St. Petersburg Square, not to execute it but to let it slowly starve within sight of bakeries. Its weakening roars served as a living lesson about the price of defiance. Similarly, when a Ming Dynasty concubine was walled alive for treason, her songbirds were sealed in miniature cages beside her, their fading trills a sonic echo of her suffocation. What makes these parallel fates so haunting is how they expose power's fluid morality. A dog digging through prison filth could be celebrated as loyalty incarnate, until the day that same instinct led it to chew through a rebel's ropes. Then suddenly it was vermin to be drowned. The Mughal parrot that once won laughs by mimicking pardons could just as easily find itself plucked featherless for repeating a seditious whisper. In the end, whether animal ally or captive, their fates were never truly their own, only reflections of humanity's endless dance between mercy and malice. The silk pillows and jeweled collars could vanish in an instant because even the most pampered royal pets weren't immune to the whims of power. Take the Byzantine Emperor Basil I's prized bear, a creature so beloved it dined from golden plates at state banquets. Until the day it swiped at a nobleman who'd insulted Basil's lineage. Overnight, the bear wasn't just a pet, it was a traitor. Chronicles describe its execution in meticulous detail, muzzled with iron, dragged through the hippodrome before jeering crowds, and beheaded with the same ceremonial axe used for human conspirators. The message: if even the emperor's favorite beast could fall, no one's head was truly safe. Queen Victoria's court witnessed a quieter but equally telling drama when her spaniel, Dash, nipped a visiting diplomat. The Queen's initial laughter turned to icy fury when the man suggested the bite reflected Britain's barbaric tendencies. Within hours, Dash, once painted by Landseer wearing a ruby-studded collar, was banished to a kennel outside Windsor, his name scrubbed from royal correspondence. The dog lived out his years in comfort, but his exile was no less symbolic. Like disgraced courtiers sent to distant estates, he became a living reminder. Favor was conditional, and loyalty went both ways. These weren't isolated incidents. The Ming Dynasty's palace records tell of a macaw that squawked a concubine's infidelity during an imperial audience. The bird was immediately strangled, its body burned alongside the accused woman. In Versailles, Louis XV's greyhound, Brice Eyes, was given away after tripping him during a quadrille. a humiliation the king couldn't forgive. The dog's new owner, a minor noble, later found its collar stuffed with a note reading, "Kings tolerate no clumsiness in beasts or men." What makes these falls from grace so chilling is how closely they mirrored political purges. When Ivan the Terrible's favorite stallion threw him during a parade, the horse wasn't just put down, it was publicly disemboweled, its entrails displayed beside the bodies of recently executed boyars. The same logic applied. Betrayal, whether intentional or accidental, demanded spectacular vengeance. Religion often sanctified this brutality. Ancient Egyptian priests interpreted a sacred cat's hiss at Pharaoh as divine displeasure, leading to temple-wide purges. In medieval Europe, pets accused of witchcraft were tried in ecclesiastical courts. One Burgundian duke's mastiff was burned at the stake alongside its owner for consorting with demons. The line between sin and sedition blurred. A dog could be both a heretic and a traitor if it suited the narrative. The volatility reveals power's deepest insecurity, its fragility. A ruler might dress a leopard in gem-encrusted velvet, but the moment those claws snagged the fabric of control, the fantasy unraveled. Pets, like people, were only as valuable as their compliance. And when they faltered, their punishment served the same purpose as any prisoners, to prove that beneath the gilded surface, the rules were written in blood. In the shadow of Egypt's towering temples, where cats padded through hallowed halls adorned with lapis lazuli collars, their every purr was considered a hymn to the goddess Bastet. To harm one wasn't just a crime, it was sacrilege, punishable by death. Yet cross the desert to Assyria, and you'd find prisoners of war buried alive beneath palace gates, their bodies transformed into living foundation stones meant to curse enemies with their suffering. This stark duality, divine favor for creatures, divine wrath for humans, wasn't arbitrary. It was theology in action, a testament to how faith could sanctify one life and damn another with equal fervor. The ancient Egyptians didn't just worship cats, they saw them as fragments of the divine walking the earth. When a cat died, households shaved their eyebrows in mourning, and wealthy patrons commissioned bronze sarcophagi inscribed with spells to guide them to the afterlife. Contrast this with the fate of enemies captured by Pharaoh Ramses III. Papyri describe how their severed hands were piled before Ammon's altar as offerings, not just to celebrate victory, but to fulfill the god's supposed thirst for justice. The same belief system that turned felines into vessels of divinity turned men into ritual objects, their very flesh a currency of piety. Assyrian omen texts took this further, interpreting the behavior of royal pets as messages from the gods. A lion cub refusing meat in its golden dish might signal divine displeasure, triggering purges in the court. Meanwhile, prisoners dragged through the streets were deliberately mutilated, not just to punish, but to render them spiritually unclean. Their missing eyes or severed tongues weren't merely wounds, they were curses, ensuring these souls could never appeal to the gods in the afterlife. The cruelty was performative theology, a spectacle to prove the king's alignment with celestial will. Yet the most chilling twist came when these two worlds collided. In Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar's sacred bulls fed honey cakes by priests were sometimes led to trample bound prisoners during festivals. The crowd would cheer as hooves crushed bone, believing the animals were enacting Marduk's judgment. Similarly, Aztec priests dressed royal Quetzal birds in miniature god costumes before sacrifices, their brilliant feathers absorbing the dying breath of victims. The message was unmistakable. Divinity demanded both adoration and blood, and the line between sacred and accursed was drawn by those who wielded the knife. This spiritual hypocrisy wasn't confined to antiquity. medieval Christian rulers like Charlemagne passed laws punishing anyone who harmed a royal stag with excommunication, yet authorized the burning of heretics as acts of mercy to save their souls. The same monasteries that bred silken-haired spaniels as comforters to the pious also housed dungeons where prisoners scratched pleas for absolution into stone walls. Faith, it seemed, could justify both the golden leash and the iron shackle, often in the same breath. Perhaps the most revealing artifact sits in Istanbul's Topkapi collection, an Ottoman miniature showing Sultan Suleiman's favorite falcon perched on his throne while dervishes convicted of heresy hang in cages outside the palace walls. The caption, quoting the Quran, reads, "All creatures are equal in God's sight." The irony would be laughable if it weren't so grotesque, because history shows us again and again, whether in the temples of Thebes or the courts of Versailles, that when power cloaks itself in divinity, even the holiest words can bend to sanctify both the cherished and the chained. Beneath the manicured lawns of Beijing's Forbidden City, archaeologists uncovered a tiny skeleton draped in a shroud of woven gold thread, the remains of a Ming Dynasty Pekingese, its paws still clutching a jade figurine meant to guide it to the afterlife. Just 300 yards away, in an unmarked pit, they found another burial, dozens of human skeletons with cervical vertebrae shattered by blunt force, their wrists bearing the telltale grooves of iron manacles. This stark juxtaposition isn't unique to China. From the banks of the Nile to the ruins of Tenochtitlan, the earth itself whispers the same brutal truth. Royal pets and political prisoners left behind forensic diaries written in bone and metal. Take the excavation of Versailles' private kennels, where soil analysis revealed traces of lavender oil and chamomile herbs used to soothe aging dogs' arthritis. Contrast that with the rust-stained flagstones of the Bastille's oubliettes, where iron isotopes in the mortar match the chemical signature of blood. Even the teeth tell stories. A Persian cat mummy from Thebes shows pristine dentition, its diet of Nile fish so rich in calcium that modern veterinarians would approve. Meanwhile, skeletal remains in Rome's Mamertine prison display the jagged marks of scurvy, their gums receded from years of moldy gruel. The message carved into these bones is unambiguous. One life ended swaddled in linen and myrrh, the other in shackles and starvation. But the most chilling revelations come from forensic reconstructions. CT scans of a Han Dynasty lapdog skull show no trauma, only the gentle wear of years gnawing on honeyed bones. Yet the skull of a scholar executed in the same era bears 72 distinct chop marks, likely from a ceremonial axe used to erase treasonous thoughts. Even their final moments were choreographed opposites. Mass spectrometry on a Byzantine empress's parrot feathers detected traces of poppy syrup, suggesting it was gently euthanized when ill. But the calcium deposits on a rebel's ribs from Constantinople's Blasphemy prison, they formed in erratic layers, proof he survived multiple rounds of torture before drowning in the Bosporus with a millstone chained to his neck. These silent witnesses force us to confront an uncomfortable pattern. The care lavished on royal animals often surpassed medical knowledge of the time. A Burgundian duke's wolfhound received a silver prosthetic paw in the 15th century, an innovation unheard of for human amputees until centuries later. Meanwhile, the healthier prisoners in Tudor England's Tower often lost limbs to gangrene from untreated shackle wounds. The disparity wasn't just neglect, it was theater. A 3,000-year-old Assyrian relief shows surgeons tending to a lion's arrow wound with tweezers and alcohol, while cuneiform tablets list prisoners treated with the mercy of salt, pouring brine into open floggings to intensify pain. Yet occasionally, archaeology delivers a twist that upends expectations. In 2008, diggers at a Saxon palace site found a high-status woman buried with a collar inscribed "Furie, Guardian of the Queen." Initially assumed to be a noblewoman's epitaph, DNA testing revealed the bones belonged to a mastiff. The shock came when they unearthed a nearby pit containing human skeletons with identical collars, thieves forced to wear dog insignia as humiliation. For once, the line between pet and prisoner blurred materially, their shared artifacts mocking the very hierarchy that created them. These relics do more than catalogue cruelty, they expose the raw mechanics of power. The perfectly preserved milk teeth of a Versailles lapdog, still embedded in a gold-chased chew toy, speak of a world where some creatures were spared even the discomfort of teething. Meanwhile, the skeletal remains of a Naples revolutionary show his molars ground down to the roots from years chewing his own lips to stifle screams. Both are time capsules, but where one encapsulates indulgence, the other immortalizes endurance. And perhaps that's why these discoveries haunt us, not just for the lives they document, but for the mirrors they hold up to our own era. When we see a pharaoh's cat mummified with toys for the afterlife, then turn to a mass grave of child laborers who built its pyramid, we're forced to ask, whose bones will future archaeologists use to measure our humanity? Every schoolchild knows the tale of Greyfriars Bobby, the Skye Terrier who supposedly guarded his master's Edinburgh grave for 14 years. Statues and films celebrate this loyal pup, his story polished into a gleaming parable of devotion. But dig deeper, and you'll find a murkier truth. Newspaper archives reveal the dog was likely a stray fed by cemetery workers, his legend inflated by Victorian tourists hungry for heartwarming tales. Meanwhile, just across the channel, the Bastille's most infamous prisoner, the so-called Man in the Iron Mask, was twisted into a monster by revolutionary propaganda. Voltaire's dramatic retellings turned a probable disgraced nobleman into a spectral horror, his featureless mask a blank canvas for every fear the monarchy inspired. These weren't just stories, they were weapons, reshaping animals into saints and humans into beasts to serve whoever held the pen. The pattern repeats through history like a hall of mirrors. Take the Mongol war dogs praised in chronicles as celestial wolves, their battlefield heroics immortalized in verse, while the same scrolls dismiss captured enemies as two-legged rats. Or consider how Tudor England recast Bloody Mary's beloved spaniels as symbols of her piety, their painted likenesses flanking her in portraits, while Protestant prisoners were inked into pamphlets as rabid dogs needing to be put down. The alchemy was deliberate, elevate creatures to mute the suffering of people. Even today, the effect lingers. Modern documentaries gush over Marie Antoinette's poodle's haute couture while breezing past the starvation of the Parisian poor, as if the Queen's affection for dogs somehow balanced the scales of her indifference. But the most insidious distortions emerge when pets and prisoners share the same story. The Aztec Emperor Moctezuma's aviaries brimmed with quetzal birds, their iridescent feathers reserved for gods and kings. Spanish conquistador accounts marveled at this harmony with nature, framing the emperor as an enlightened steward while downplaying how those same birds' caretakers were often prisoners of war, their hands amputated to prevent theft of precious plumage. The birds symbolized peace, the maimed men hidden in their shadows embodied conquest. This selective storytelling isn't ancient history. Think of how Soviet propaganda films showed Stalin gently petting his wolfhounds, the camera lingering on his smile as the narrator extolled his compassion while gulags swelled off-screen. Or how modern politicians pose with rescue dogs after signing policies that cage migrant children. The mechanism hasn't changed, only the stagehands have. What makes these myths so persistent is their emotional payload. A dog's loyalty tugs at universal heartstrings, softening the edges of regimes we might otherwise condemn. Prisoners stripped of humanity by rumor become abstractions their pain easier to justify. When the Habsburgs commissioned tapestries of their greyhounds wearing crowns playfully placed on their heads by laughing archdukes, they weren't just celebrating pets. They were crafting an alternative narrative to the one whispered in taverns about the emperor's brother, starved to death in a remote castle with only a pet parrot for company. That parrot, incidentally, survived its ability to mimic his pleas for food, making it a macabre court curiosity. The ultimate proof of propaganda's power lies in how these stories still shape our view of history. Tourists leave flowers at Greyfriars Bobby's statue, while the Bastille's prisoners remain faceless specters. We weep for the Romanov spaniels shot alongside the royal family, yet barely recall the names of the Bolsheviks who later perished in Stalin's purges. The imbalance isn't accidental. It's the result of centuries of narrative engineering, where every wagging tail and clinking chain was curated to manipulate emotions. And that's the real cage, not the iron bars of the past, but the stories that keep us from seeing clearly who was cherished, who was crushed, and why. By the 19th century, the grand theaters of absolute power began to dim their lights. The Pekingese that once lounged on dragon-embroidered cushions in China's Forbidden City found themselves demoted to lapdogs for European aristocrats, their political significance reduced to a fashion statement. Meanwhile, the dank prison cells beneath castles, once filled with groaning souls whose only crime was offending a monarch's pride, slowly gave way to legal reforms. England's Habeas Corpus Act, France's Declaration of the Rights of Man, even the gradual abolition of torture chambers across Europe signaled a seismic shift. Prisoners were no longer just props in a ruler's drama, but humans with rights. Yet this transformation wasn't as clean as history books suggest. Like ink bleeding through parchment, the old ways lingered in subtle, stubborn stains. Take the fate of royal menageries. The lions and elephants that once roared beside thrones as living symbols of imperial reach were quietly exiled to public zoos. Queen Victoria's beloved Carly, noble, might have worn a monogrammed coat, but no one pretended his wagging tail held the same weight as Elizabeth I's parrots, whose mimicry once swayed court decisions. Pets became private indulgences rather than political tools, adorable but irrelevant to governance. Yet even as animals retreated into domesticity, their symbolic power never fully vanished. When Soviet space dogs like Laika were launched into orbit during the Cold War, their missions were draped in propaganda, their furry faces plastered across newspapers as proof of communist superiority. The pets were no longer policymaking, but they were still performing. Prisoners, on the other hand, saw their roles evolve in the opposite direction. The same era that turned war horses into pasture ornaments also birthed movements for due process and humane treatment. The infamous Bastille, where nameless souls once rotted without trial, became a rallying symbol for revolutionaries demanding justice. By the 20th century, international treaties condemned torture and prisoner rights entered legal codes. But here's the catch: the theatrics of punishment didn't disappear, they just changed costumes. Stalin's show trials, with their scripted confessions and choreographed verdicts, were no less performative than medieval kings parading chained rebels through town squares. The stakes had shifted, but the underlying message, power's ability to script lives, remained eerily familiar. And then there are the holdouts, the traditions too stubborn to fade. Modern leaders might not keep jeweled leopards, but they've perfected the art of the diplomatic puppy. Remember Putin gifting a Siberian husky to Bulgaria's prime minister, or the uproar when Turkey's Erdogan gave a white Persian cat to the Pope. These aren't just cute gestures, they're echoes of the Mughal emperors who sent rare falcons to vassal states, a velvet-gloved reminder of who holds the leash. Even in an age of human rights, the language of animal diplomacy persists because it speaks to something primal, the unspoken hierarchy between giver and receiver. So what lessons endure from this unraveling duality? First, that power always craves symbols, whether it's a president's rescue dog humanizing him or a dissident's harsh sentence warning others. Second, and more unsettling, the line between progress and pageantry is thinner than we think. For every abolished dungeon, there's a Guantanamo Bay. For every retired warhorse, a drone strike filmed in high def. The stages have changed, but the show never really ended. The difference now, we're all the audience and the critics. Whether we choose to applaud the puppies or protest the prisons is the question history leaves ringing in our ears. Scroll through Instagram today, and you'll find influencers cradling teacup Pomeranians in designer carriers, their hashtags boasting #spoilerdrotten, swipe left, and a news alert whispers of a journalist vanished into a black site prison. Their last post a grainy selfie captioned, "Speaking truth has consequences." The stage lights have brightened, the costumes updated, but the script remains eerily familiar. Modern celebrity pets, draped in monogrammed Burberry coats, are the spiritual heirs to Versailles' jeweled spaniels, living proof of their owner's capacity for tenderness, carefully staged to offset harsher realities. Meanwhile, political prisoners today don't languish in medieval dungeons. They're detained for questioning in facilities with sterile names like re-education centers, their existence scrubbed from social media by algorithms and censors. The tools have digitized, but the game hasn't changed. Consider the viral moment when a certain world leader's golden retriever ambushed a press conference, stealing the microphone with a goofy bark. The clip racked up millions of views, humanizing a regime accused of silencing dissent. Yet that same week, leaked documents revealed a network of secret prisons where detainees were forbidden to speak above a whisper. The dissonance isn't coincidence, it's strategy. Just as Louis XIV used his lapdogs to soften his image while the man in the iron mask molded below, modern power brokers understand that a well-timed puppy photo can drown out 1,000 silenced voices. Even the economics mirror ancient hierarchies. The $90,000 spent on a single handbag-sized chihuahua at a celebrity auction could fund a year's worth of legal aid for political prisoners in 3 countries. The Instagram-famous cats of Silicon Valley CEOs enjoy custom-built kitty condos with climate control and organic salmon buffets, while migrant detainees a few miles away sleep under foil blankets in overcrowded cages. The contrast isn't just ironic, it's archetypal. Pharaohs flaunted their sacred cats while slaves built pyramids. Today's elites flaunt rescue dogs while their supply chains rely on exploited labor. The currency has shifted from gold to likes, but the underlying calculus remains. Conspicuous compassion for creatures distracts from systemic cruelty toward humans. Yet there's a twist in our digital age. Ancient rulers controlled narratives through stone edicts and court poets. Today's dissidents weaponize the same platforms that showcase privilege. A jailed activist's Twitter thread might go viral while a dictator's prized Akita flops at a trickshot challenge. The parrot that once squawked propaganda in palace courtyards now has a TikTok counterpart, a blue and gold macaw named Poco, whose Free Palestine mimicry got him banned from 3 platforms. Even in exile, the dance continues. A Belarusian streamer's Siberian husky, filmed voting against the regime with its paw, became a protest symbol after its owner disappeared. The pets, unwitting as ever, still find themselves thrust onto history's chessboard. What does this enduring duality reveal about us? perhaps that power's most enduring illusion is the belief that mercy and malice can be compartmentalized. The Romanov children's spaniels were brushed with silver combs while their parents signed orders to fire on bread rioters. Today, a tech mogul's Instagram shows him bottle-feeding an orphaned hedgehog as his factories face another suicide net investigation. The separation is the point. The hedgehog's tiny paws and the worker's calloused hands must never share the same frame. But history's lesson is clear. When we're moved by a golden retriever in a presidential palace but numb to a hunger striker in cell block D, we're not just witnessing power's theater. We're its audience, its accomplices, and if we're not careful, its next cast. The same psychological levers that once elevated royal pets to divine status and reduced prisoners to nameless specters still pull at the strings of our modern world. Think about the last time you paused to watch a viral video of a kitten batting at a toy while scrolling past headlines about mass incarcerations or migrant detention centers. This isn't just distraction, it's the same ancient calculus of power, repackaged for the digital age. Rulers once understood that controlling whose suffering was seen and whose was erased could shape entire empires. Today, the algorithms that flood our feeds with adorable animals and celebrity scandals aren't so different from the court painters who immortalized a king's lapdog while prisoners molded in unrecorded cells. The question isn't whether we've moved beyond this duality, but whether we've even recognized it. Take the way we celebrate shelter pets adopted by politicians, their rescue stories plastered across campaign ads, their wagging tails softening tough on-crime rhetoric. Meanwhile, the faces of those locked away under those same policies rarely trend unless tragedy strikes. The emotional math is brutally efficient. A golden retriever in a bandana humanizes its owner. A statistic about prison overcrowding numbs us with abstraction. This isn't accidental. It's the modern version of a Mughal emperor parading his jeweled falcons through Delhi while rebels' heads decorated the city gates. Both spectacles were designed to direct attention and, more crucially, to direct empathy. The real danger lies in how these choices normalize inequality. When a celebrity's French bulldog gets its own couture line while thousands of real people sleep in concrete cells without mattresses, we're rehearsing an ancient script. Archaeologists find the same pattern in every empire's ruins: tiny gold collars in one layer of soil, rusted manacles in the next. The distance between a medieval king mourning his favorite warhorse and a tech billionaire weeping over his cloned sheep isn't as vast as we'd like to believe. Both performances ask us to measure compassion selectively, to weep for the loss of a creature while ignoring the systemic brutality that made their privilege possible. But here's where history offers a warning. Every society that leaned too heavily on this duality eventually faced revolt. The French Revolution didn't just storm the Bastille, it slaughtered the aristocracy's pets en masse, recognizing them as living symbols of misplaced priorities. Today's activists similarly weaponize visibility, forcing cameras into IC detention centers or live-streaming protests outside primate labs. The counter-strategy is always the same: make the invisible impossible to ignore. When a viral video of a police K9 attacking a black teen sparks more outrage than the teen's own testimony, we're seeing the same old hierarchy at work, where even outrage follows a predetermined script. The most telling modern parallel might be in how we memorialize. Statues of wartime hero animals multiply globally, from London's memorial horses to Tokyo's loyal dog Hachiko. Yet memorials to political prisoners, the dissidents, the whistleblowers, the disappeared, remain contentious, often erased or vandalized. This imbalance isn't neutral. It reflects who we're comfortable celebrating and who we'd rather forget. A bronze statue of a trench rat carrying a message "Real" in London is charming. A plaque for Chelsea Manning is polarizing. The lesson: societies, like kings, prefer their symbols sanitized. So the next time your feed serves up a celebrity's puppy alongside a blurred-out prison transfer, pause. That split second isn't just an algorithm at work. It's the latest iteration of a 5,000-year-old power play. The pets we elevate and the prisoners we overlook aren't random. Their choices echoing the same deliberate calculus that once placed a lion on a golden chain and a poet in an iron cage. The only difference now, we're the ones holding the leash, and